Welcome to another video. This is your instructor Admas Kanfu from SparesQA.com. This video we are going to look at examples of using functions, defining functions and calling functions, right? So let's go to our project, and under the functions folder you will find a file called functions examples. Function examples. All right. Okay, so this is going to be example function to add two numbers. Okay, it's going to be a similar function to what we saw in the PowerPoint slide. So the keyword to define a function is def for definition, and you're going to give it any name. In my case, I'm going to call it my adder, and it's going to take two parameters. I'm going to call those parameters a and b just to keep it simple. And then at the body, as you can see, PyCharm indented for me automatically when I hit enter. You saw that before. So I'm going to define a variable total, and I'm going to say a plus b. Okay. Obviously, this is like you could run into an issue, right? Like a plus b. What if a and b are not integers? What if one come up as an integer and the other one comes up as a string, right? Like this is not the most clean function, plus it's not very useful function, so it's not, you don't have to do much about it. I just want to show you how to define a function, and then we're going to return total. Okay, let me make it a little bit cleaner. I'll do this. White space, those empty spaces don't mean anything. Now we define the function. Okay, so outside of the function we call a function. So if I do my adder and I do it this way, this would give me an error. Okay, so now let me show you. If I run this, let me clean this up, move this up a little bit. As you can see, it says type error, my adder missing two required positional arguments a and b. Two required positional arguments. So when I define the function, I said that it takes parameters a and b, right? So I need to pass in the arguments here, but I did not. So you get an error. Keep that in mind. So if you define it with parameters and they don't have default values, when you call the function, you need to provide that. So let's say I want to add, I want to put 4, comma, and let's say I want to put 8, right? Now, if I was to run it, there's no error, but at the same time, there's no output. We didn't see anything. We don't even know if this run or not, right? So here we can put a print statement. So I can say print total, right? And if I run it, now it printed 12 because we know the function run. Again, it's not very useful here to print it here inside of the function. You can print messages, but in this case, it's not useful. So here, whatever the function is returning, we can store it in a variable. So I can say my total is my adder, and we pass in the functions. Now if I run it, again, nothing's going to happen because we didn't say print or anything. So here, we can print my total. Okay, and if I run it, there you go, my total is printed. If I was to change this to 4 plus whatever 15, right, it should print 19 now. It printed 19. So the idea is, this one is very simple. The function literally has one line, but you can have a lot of logic in here, a lot of stuff that the function is doing, and all you have to do is change the values, and you can execute that function as many times as you want, right? You don't have to rewrite the code. In fact, we're going to talk about packages, but this will be saved in a file the way it is right now, and then some other functions, some other files can import this and use it. Okay, we're going to talk about importing in libraries coming up, but the whole point is you package it. You package the entire code in a function, and you make a function call, so that will execute that part, and you pass in the different parameters as you need it. Okay, so that is a very basic example of a function. Let's look at another example. So in this second example, let me move this, print, comment all this out. Okay, so I want to write a function that will determine if a given state has sales tax or not. Okay, so this is another example. Function to determine if given state has no sales tax. Okay, this is a US a US state, and some states don't have sales tax, and I want to write a function. When you call the function and you pass in the state, it will tell you does it has a sales tax or not. Okay, so to define the function, I'm going to say def has no sales tax. Okay, and it's going to take a state, right? Then I have a list of states that has no tax. I'm going to copy that. Here you go. So this is a list, and I called it states with no sales tax, and there are 5 states. Okay, it's Alaska, Delaware, Montana, New Hampshire, I don't know how to pronounce that, Oregon. Okay, so those 5 states don't charge sales tax. So in my program, let's say I have several things that I want to do, and I want to call this function to see if I should charge a sales tax or not. Let's say I have an e-commerce site and the user logged in and is trying to check out, and when it's check out, based on the address, I need to figure out if I should calculate the sales tax or not. So if the user lives in one of those states, I don't want to calculate the sales tax. So this function needs to give me true or false. So I can say I can save a variable. I can say no tax and initialize it with none, and I can say if state in states with no tax, right? No tax is going to be true, right? Else no tax is going to be false, and then I need to return this value. I need to do return no tax. All right, so let's go over it. We have a function definition. It has a name. It has no sales tax. Okay, so it's going to return true or false. You try to name the function in a way that it makes sense. Like if it's going to return a true or false, you're trying to make it sound like a question. But try to be a little descriptive. You don't want to be too long. Don't worry about this warning messages that show up. Maybe I should turn it off, but it's complaining about the spaces and stuff. Just things would work, but there are conventions you have to follow, and in this case there are some issues. So try to come up with a name that's descriptive, but that's not not too long. Okay, so this function takes one parameter. It takes a state, right? And we have a list of states that have no sales tax. So, and I initialize it and say no sales tax, no tax, just any variable. I put it as none. So if the state that's passed in here happens to be in the no tax states, then I'm going to assign the variable true. Else I'm going to assign the variable false, and then I'm going to return that value. Now the user state, for example, let's say I can say user state. Okay, let's say user state is California. Now I'm going to call a function. So I want to charge it, right? Charge tax is going to be has no tax, and I'm going to put the user state instead of charge tax. I can just say has tax. Has tax. All right, and I'm going to print that value. Print has tax. So if the user state is California, let's run this, right? False, because the user has, wait a minute, let's see. If the state is in one of those states, well, then it's true. Has no tax. Okay, has no tax. This should be has tax. I can just say no tax. I can use the same variable, but I don't want to confuse you, so I can just say tax. I can just say tax, right? I do struggle with names sometimes. So I know I'm free to name it anything, but I always struggle with coming up with good names for file names particularly, but functions and variables as well. That's just a struggle that most programmers do struggle with. Okay, so if we run this, basically California is false, right? Because it does have a state tax. It's not a free state. What if I put Delaware? What if I put DE? Now it's going to be true. There you go. So the point is, you just write a function, and every time you just call it, you just change the variable. If I was to change this to Oregon, and if I was to run it, it's going to be true. Okay. All right, so that is a very simple function. To make this a little bit better, first of all, since all of those are uppercase, let's make sure we're comparing uppercase to uppercase. So it's a good idea to convert the state into upper before we do this, before we make the check. Another thing, in fact, let me copy this so you have it in your notes and you know that what the difference is. Another thing is, instead of saving it into a variable, I can literally just do return true, or I can do return false. So I don't need this and I don't need this. Look at that. Now it's much cleaner, right? You can see this function and compare it with this function. If this statement is true, then return true, else return false. In this case, I saved it into a variable, I returned a variable. Either way is fine, but in my projects, this is how I would code it. I would code it because it's so much cleaner, right? And if I was to run it, just to make sure it works, there you go. Always make sure it works, okay? Because you might have typo, you might have little things that you can't see with your eyes easily, but cause problems. All right, so this is an example of a function. We just saw two different functions. So I think that's plenty to just get the concept of how the functions work and how to define a function and how to call a function. We're going to look at another example of using a keyword parameter on the next video, but we use functions on every exercise that's coming up, so you're going to get plenty of practice on using functions, but you got the basics down already. Let's keep going. Welcome to another video. This is your instructor, Admas Kung Fu from supersqa.com. In this video, we are going to start talking about finding elements. Okay, so we are going to have a general discussion here, and we're going to look at examples in upcoming videos. This is the meat and potatoes of Selenium, really, like finding elements and doing things with it. All right. So Selenium gives us several locators or locating methods, a way to find elements. All right, we've looked at this before once. So these are by ID, by Css Selector, by XPath, by class name, by link text, by partial link text, by name, and by tag name. All right, so you don't really have to memorize those. I'm going to show you how to quickly get them. While you're running code, you can just find out what those are, and eventually you will learn them. Don't try to spend time trying to memorize it. They're really easy as well. ID is the best one. We are going to talk about it why, and CSS Selector is the second best one in my opinion and in my research. All right, so those are the 6 different ways we can find elements. So WebDriver gives you a few functions to be able to find them. All right, you use those attributes what I just talked about, like CSS, ID, and such, but to use those, there's also a function or a method, okay? And it's called find element by ID, find element by CSS Selector, find element by XPath, and such for each one. Each one of those have a function called find element by whatever. And in the parentheses, right, in there, you provide, if you say find element by ID, you're going to provide an ID. If you say find element by CSS Selector, you're going to provide CSS Selector. We are going to spend a lot of time learning about CSS selectors, how to create your own selectors and such. It's a very powerful topic here. The same with XPath. Okay, so we have functions like that. Notice this says find element. Okay, the same exact ones exist, but with plural. Those are exactly the same, except instead of find element, this one has an S here. The difference is, when you say find element, it's going to find one element, right? Typically with ID, you're supposed to have one element that has an ID, so that's not an issue. But with CSS, multiple elements can match that CSS. Multiple elements can match that class. So it's going, if you don't have the S here, it's going to give you the first one, which normally that's what we do. And if you have the S here, it's going to give you everything that it finds. So it's going to give you a list. Instead of an element, it will give you a list of elements, okay? So those are functions that are available for you. All right, so the ones I just spent time talking to you or showing you, they will be gone soon. In Selenium 4, that is deprecated. When we actually run code, I'll show you the error message, the warning message, but it says deprecated, find element by blah, blah, blah. Those functions will be gone. So anything you write new, don't use those, okay? So there is another function that says just find element. It's just find element and find elements. Okay, this with an S or without the S. Then instead of like normally you would give it one parameter, this one will take 2 parameters. In the first one, you give it by something, by ID, by CSS, by class or whatever, and the actual locator. See the difference? The difference here is that what you're using, like the class name, the XPath, the CSS, is part of the function name, and it takes just 1 parameter. But here, the function name is always find element. Whatever you're using, the function is find element or find elements, and it takes in 2 parameters. So this one works both in Selenium 4 and Selenium 3, right? This always been there. So it's always good to use this because eventually this one will go away. All right, hopefully that made sense. All right, so just an example. So because here I have by, and by is actually a keyword or a class. It's actually a class. It's almost like an enum if you come from a Java world. So you import it like this. Again, it's nice if you can memorize this, if you can remember this, but you don't have to because we're going to do it a million times. So from selenium.webdriver.com and .by, import by. This is the name of the file, the module, by, all lowercase. In Python, standard modules are lowercase and classes are uppercase. Well, start with uppercase. So import by, then you say by.id, by.css selector, by.xpath, just, more. Or if you don't want to import by, you could do a string. You can use ID string, CSS selector string. See, this CSS selector is all uppercase and it has underscore. This one doesn't, and it's all lowercase. You can do that. I'll show you why that works. Because these things here in the by class, they just map into a string. They literally just map into a string. But in my opinion, I think it's better to use this because later on, if the developers actually change it, they're not going to change the enum. They're not going to change the constant. They have the right to change the string. So even though this works, I think we're going to do this for the most part. But just as a reminder, I'm going to use a mix. I'm going to do both so it's possible. And when you're reading code, like, at work or in GitHub or whatever, you never know what you're going to read. So I want you to know it exists. That's why I present it to you here. Okay. All right, so find element returns a web element, and find elements return a list of web elements. So a web element is a class of its own. Okay, a web element is a class in Selenium. Okay, and that's the item we return. So if we look at this code here, I'm going to say driver.find element, and I'm going to pass in the string this time, class name and product, and it's going to return that and put it into this variable called product, which is any variable I came up with. Then if you do a type, you see this is what type it is. It's a web element. And the location is Selenium WebDriver remote web element. Okay, and we do exact same command, but we have an S here, products, but the class is the same. Now if we do a type, it's a list, and if we print it, it's a bunch of things. It's a list, and if we look at what's inside of that list, those are web elements. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you here. The difference between using plural and singular. Then when sometimes you type really fast and you use auto suggestion, you might get one or the other, and you might get unexpected behavior. So remember, if you have an S, it returns something else. It will return a list, right? All right, so once we get a web element, the web element itself has a find element method. You can think of it as a child element, right? You can say find element. Let's say you get find element and you get a table. And now the table is a web element, right? It has its own a bunch of properties. And now you want to get the rows. Then you can actually take the table and do dot find element. You know how you did driver dot find element? You can get whatever you found on the first one, the web element, dot find element. For example, literally, I was just talking about the table from my head, but my notes actually use a table. So driver.find element, use ID, and the ID is main table, all right? And assign it to a variable called my table. Now, if I want to get all the rows, okay, remember also this is singular, I use singular here. Now, instead of driver, I do my table dot, which my table is it's a web element. This will return a web element. And I do my table dot find elements with an S by tag name, and the tag name is tr. which will give me a list of all the elements that are tr. Okay, so this is a practical application where if you don't have a specific class or each row doesn't have some kind of unique identifier, then you can get the table, then find the rows inside of the table. Okay, so that's basically an introduction of how to find elements, but all of this is going to make way more sense when we actually do it. So let's go ahead and use some of the most of the different methods to find elements and start practicing. Welcome to another video. In this video we are going to have a discussion about element visible or element exists. We're going to talk about the differences and how it affects our tests and how to deal with it, okay? When an element exists versus when an element is visible, because it does happen quite often. I figured it deserves its own video. All right, so let's go to PyCharm. I'm going to create a folder here. I'm going to call it present versus displayed. Okay, so you're going to find all the resources under there. One thing I want to do here is I have an HTML. I'm going to copy. Let me do copy and paste it here. Paste. Yep. Add. Okay. So this is just an HTML I created. Very simple HTML. No, that's not it. This is the one here. Let me close this. So it has 3 buttons, like nothing special. Let's do inspect. So technically, so let me close this and make this bigger. All right. Let's see what's the best way. This is probably the best way for the video. All right. So as you can see, there is 3 elements visible, 3 buttons, but technically there are 4, except one of them is hidden. Okay. So this we can use as an example of dealing with visible versus hidden. Okay. So let's create a Python file, and it's going to be a Python file. I'm going to say present versus displayed example 1. We're going to try to look at 2 different examples for this. All right, so we're going to say from Selenium import WebDriver. Driver is WebDriver.cron. No. Let's set an implicit wait, because this is just a simple example. I'm just going to use implicit wait with 5 seconds just to avoid any kind of errors. And the URL is going to be, let's take this file. Let me copy the absolute path, go to the browser, paste that here, and copy it again. For me, I need to do that. It's easier for me because I get automatically replace the spaces with whatever. Basically, I need the URL to work the easy way, so I do it that way. All right, so that's my URL. Then I'm going to say driver.get URL. Okay, so once I do that, what I want to do is find the elements. Where is my notes? All right, so what I want to do is I want to find let me see, where is, there you go. So I want to find the button. I want to find button 1. It has an ID of button 1. The second one has button 2, btn 3, btn 4. I want to find those elements. Okay, so I'm going to say my button 1 is going to be driver.find element by ID, and it's going to be the ID is going to be button 1, right? And I want to print the text. I'm going to say my button 1 text is going to be my button 1 dot text. So to get a text from an element, you just take the element and do that text. That will give you the entire text of the element. Okay, so I'm going to print, I'm going to say first button text is that. I'm going to say format my button 1 text. All right, this is what's going to print. So let's see. I'm going to go to presents. I'm going to do Python .py. Okay, something is up. Oh, example, Python. There you go. I just had a hard time typing the name. All right, so it opened this and it did print the first button text. Okay, so we can do the same thing for all three of them. So let me copy from my note just to make it faster. All right, as you can see, all I'm doing is getting my button and printing the text, getting my second, my third one, and my fourth one. Okay, and let's see what happens when we run this test. The browser opened, it opened very quickly. As you can see, it printed. Let me kill it. All right, so first button text, that, second button text, that, third button text, that, fourth button text, nothing. So that's the point. That's what I wanted, the point I want to make. So button 4, okay, we don't see it here, but it didn't throw an exception. As you can see, it didn't throw an exception, but it didn't print the text either. It printed an empty string for the text. If we let's put a breakpoint here, import pdb.setTrace, and you can import in line just like that. Let's hit enter. All right, the browser open. Now, if we look at what my button 4 is, oops, my button 4. As you can see, it's a web element, right? It does exist. That means it found it. It didn't throw an exception. So if I do button4.txt, .text, it's an empty string because it's not visible. Let's see what are our available methods. So I can say dir my button4. All right, there's a bunch of available methods we can run on it, and one of them is displayed. So if we do my, I copied that. If we do my button4 dot is displayed, it's a method, and hit enter, we get a false because it's not displayed. As you can see, it is hidden. Okay, so that's how when you're writing a test, just like if I was trying to make sure this button4 is on the page, I can't just say find element and say my test passed, because find element will find the element, but it's not displayed. So I have to do something like check if the element is displayed or not before doing something to it. For example, I want to click it, right? So I have to say if my button4 dot is displayed, then my button4 dot click. Else I can just say raise an exception or something. Raise exception saying button4 is not displayed, right? So you can do something like this. You can handle it something like this. Basically, you need to check if it's displayed or not. You cannot rely, you cannot say your test is good to go just because it's visible. Okay, so let's run it one more time. It should throw an exception. There you go, we got an exception, say button4 is not displayed. So that's the big difference between visible and not visible. Basically, it exists versus is displayed. So you can always check, you should always check is displayed, because finding it did not throw an exception. All right, so that's one example. Let's look at another example. So in this example, I have another HTML file. Let me grab that, copy it, and paste it here. All right, we got that. So this one says present versus visible with cars. Okay, so this one is simple as well. I basically have a bunch of radios, and if you select them, they're cars. So we have Mercedes-Benz, and we have the models. There's the A class, C class, G class. We have BMW, M series, 3 series, and the 6 series. My favorite is the 6 series and the M series. Not related, but you know, just so you know, in case somebody want to buy me a gift or something. I love them. So Toyota, we have this. So as you can see, based on what is selected, some of the elements are hidden. Okay. So let us create a new Python file, and I'm going to say present versus visible example with cars. I'm going to give it the same name as the HTML, except this one is Python code. All right, so here, as always, we are going to need you know, all our, let me just copy that to make it And I'll just explain. Okay, all our imports. Obviously, we need WebDriver. In this case, we want to do I want to do an explicit wait. So I imported this WebDriver wait. I imported the expected conditions, and I imported the by. Okay, so let's do driver. Driver is equal to WebDriver.chrome. All right, and let's just create an object for the wait. Wait is going to be WebDriver wait. It's going to take driver as the first argument, and let's say 5 seconds as the second argument. And the URL is going to be, now we're going to copy the path, the absolute path, and I'm going to go to the browser, paste that, hit enter, grab it, copy it here, and this is my URL. Then I'm going to say driver.get URL. Okay, so that would just go to the site. So what I want to do is, so first let's just try this. Let's say Python presence versus visible cars.py. Let's run it. So we have a browser to check out. Okay, there you go. So let's say go to inspect. What I want to do is click on the 6 series. Okay, so I'm gonna go here, do 6 series, and I'm gonna actually, let me be consistent, do it here. So let me get the for this input, let me get the CSS copy. Do I have an ID? I don't have an ID. Let me just do the Css Copy Selector. All right, so let me find it. So series 6 is equal to driver.find element by CSS selector, and this is the CSS selector. So let's run it again and see what happens. I'm running it. All right, there you go. No errors. The page did open. No errors. Why? It's not displayed. As you can see, this is what's open. It's not displayed, but it is there. So no error, just like I explained earlier. Now, what happens if I want to click it? So I want to say series6.click. Okay, now let's run the test. I expect to see some kind of error. There you go. Okay, the page did open and it threw an error, an exception. Element is not interactable, which makes sense. It's visible, but you cannot interact. Like as a human being, right? You don't even know if it exists or not unless you click this first, then you can select it. Okay, so you get an error like this. So the solution is basically you have to select what you need to select first, right? So the solution, if this was a real script, first we would need to select BMW. You write the code. We don't need to do that. I just wanted to show you. But first, you would have to select the BMW, make sure the 6 series is visible, then click it. Okay. So that's one example. Let's do the same thing. To just show you the same concept with a different example. So with the explicit wait way. Okay. So let's do the same thing. I will say series 6 is equal to wait that until expected condition presence of element located. Okay, and I'm going to pass in this entire locator again. I want to show you the difference between presence and existence, visibility. Okay, let me minimize this. All right, so this is the same element. I'm trying to find it, and I'm just say wait for the presence of the element located by this. Okay, so let me clear buffer and run the test. And I shouldn't see any error. No error because what I told it is wait for the presence of the element. But instead of saying wait for the presence of the element, there is another method that says element to be clickable. There should be something that says element to be selected. I don't see it here. Element to be clickable. There you go. Okay, so that's another condition. So let me comment this out. Now let's see what happens. What do you think will happen? No issues or issues? Hit enter. Okay, I gave it, remember the wait is 5 seconds, so it's not going to fail right away. Bam, it waited 5 seconds and we got a timeout exception because it waited that long until the condition is met, and the condition is never met until that time, so we got a timeout. Basically, in 5 seconds, the element is not clickable because it's not. This is a browser that opened and it's not even visible, right? So the element is not clickable. If we click BMW first, let's do this. Why don't we? I don't have that in the notes, but let me just do that. Now let me go into this BMW, this radio here. Let me get the copy the CSS copy selector. Okay, so now let's just click that. So I can say driver define element by CSS selector, and this is a CSS selector. Oh, I could have used the ID, and I'll just do click. By the way, you can do it in one line, right? Usually what I've showed you so far is we assign it to a variable and click on the variable, but now we can just do it here. Okay, so now let's run the test, the same test. We're waiting for the element to be clickable, and voila, no error. Okay, because we did, and if I bring this over here, we did select BMW and this is visible, then that happened, that no errors happened. Okay, so we can do that. Earlier we did with the other example, we check if it's displayed, then click it. But in this one, we used an expected condition, which we end up with the same type of result. Okay, I hope you like these examples. I'm pretty sure they demonstrate the point of the difference between visible and existence and how to deal with it. Okay, this is very common. This type of issues you're going to run all the time. All right, great. Let's keep going. Welcome to the course Python and Selenium WebDriver from scratch. In this course, you're going to learn the programming language Python all from scratch and Selenium WebDriver using the Python programming language. And both of them are going to be from scratch. So there are two parts. The first part is going to be all Python. We're going to dive deep into Python and learn how to write code. And the second part is going to be on Selenium WebDriver. And for Selenium WebDriver, we are going to use a Python programming language. The course is created by me. My name is Admas Kanfu. I'm a senior software engineer in test. My background in education is mechanical engineering. I worked for a few years in mechanical engineering and I transitioned into software. I graduated from San Jose State University, right here in the heart of Silicon Valley. And I've been working as an automation engineer since 2013, and I've been teaching since 2015. So you know who you're learning from, and here you have it. You have my credentials. So what you learn from this course is how to write Python program. That's mainly the core, right? So Selenium is a library. Selenium is a tool which you're going to use with Python. So Python is a programming language. So even if you don't use Selenium, you're still going to be able to write code using Python and automate a bunch of things. And also you are going to learn Selenium WebDriver from scratch, which is a tool we're going to use to write automated tests for web-based systems, for browsers, basically. And we're going to discuss both these topics from scratch. And we're going to talk about best practices and tips and shortcuts and such. Based on my experience, every time I'm discussing a topic, I will give you things that are not just a core concept, but things that come from experience. Who's the course for? It's really for anybody trying to learn how to code. Whether you're trying to just learn to code in general or you're trying to learn to code in Python, this is a good course for you. Because Python is one of the easiest languages to learn. And once you learn Python, it's easier for you to transition into other languages. So this course will teach you how to program starting from scratch. I assume you don't know anything about programming and start off from scratch and teach you how to program. And we are going to use Python for the whole thing. So we're going to learn majority of what you can do with Python and how to use it. It's also for QAs, for manual testers that are testing manually right now and want to transition into an automation position. You can take advantage of this course by learning how to use Selenium with Python to automate your tests. Also, people looking for QA jobs. Basically, if you know how to automate, your chances of getting a QA job, even as a manual tester, will increase dramatically, right? These days, most companies look for somebody who have some knowledge of automation, even though the position is for manual testing, because you are going to interact with a lot of software engineers and automation engineers. All right, what you need before taking this course. So the prerequisites for this course is really nothing. You just need a computer, whether it's a Windows, a Mac, or a Unix system. You can watch the videos on mobile devices, of course, but you won't have a good experience writing code in mobile devices. So I do recommend having a desktop or a laptop. Now, another thing is, if you have a little bit of knowledge on HTML, it would help. It's not really required. I should not even put it as a prerequisite, but it does help. Python has nothing to do with HTML, so you're not going to need HTML knowledge for Python part of the course. But when we get to Selenium, everything we do is write tests for an HTML page. So if you have just very basic knowledge of HTML, it would be helpful. If you do want to go get some education, if you just want to learn a little bit about HTML, I'd say you invest like about a day, maybe 1 day worth of tutorial for HTML is plenty for what you need for this course. And the most important thing you need for this course is the will to learn and to practice. Notice I say to practice. Coding is just like a sport, okay? You can watch somebody code all day. That doesn't mean you're going to learn how to code. You can watch LeBron James play basketball all day. That doesn't mean you're going to learn how to play basketball. You're going to learn the rules of basketball, but you won't be able to play. So with coding, it's the same thing. You have to practice, okay? I have plenty of examples and plenty of practice material. So you have to write the code. It's just like a sport, right? So you have to have the will. That's definitely a prerequisite for this course. So I do use a very easy to follow approach. Everything is well organized. It's broken down into smaller pieces, smaller topics. I start from the basics. I myself learned how to program. So I'm a basically self-taught programmer, right? I learned online, just like you are doing. I learned by watching videos, by asking questions and such things. So I know the frustration. I know what it takes. I know how it feels to be able to learn online, to find information that's all scattered. So that's an advantage to you because I know how it feels. So I know how to present it in a way that you would enjoy and you would actually appreciate. So it's organized very well. There's plenty of practice available for you, and I'm always available for questions. You can look at the Q&A section. I'm answering questions all the time, and feel free to ask questions at any time. One thing I want to emphasize is this is because I have experience teaching and I've seen what kind of questions people ask, is learn how to use it. Learn how to use it, not how it works, okay? At first, you want to learn how to use it before you learn how it works. So when you're learning how to code, learn the syntax, learn how to write the code, learn how to make it run, okay? So a good example I give for this is when you're learning how to drive, do you know how internal combustion engine works? When somebody is teaching you how to drive, is the first question you ask, how does the engine work, right? How does the air and the gas mix together and the crankshaft and all of that? No, right? You don't care about that. You want to know how the steering wheel works. You want to know how to shift gears. You want to know how to brake. You want to know how to give gas. You want to know how to turn on the lights, all the things you need to be able to drive and pass the driving test. Then after you're comfortable with driving, that's when you're going to start asking questions about how the actual car works, okay? So in programming, I do want you to have that kind of mindset at first. You want to just learn it. The reason I say that is I don't want you to be overwhelmed, okay? Already learning it is you absorbing a lot of information, and when you go deeper and try to understand how the computer works and everything, it can get overwhelming and you can get discouraged. And I really hate for anybody to get discouraged. So try to focus on using the information you're getting, okay? Ask questions on how to use it, why it's used, okay? So that is my my pointers for now, and let's just keep going and start learning.